Silas Mercer put his last dollar on the table to buy a woman nobody wanted. Not because he needed a wife, not because he was lonely, but because watching a man gamble away another human being in front of a room full of grinning drunks was the kind of thing that hollowed you out if you didn't do something about it. The woman didn't speak, didn't beg, just stood there covered in trail dust while men laughed and bet on her like livestock. Silas didn't know her name, didn't know if saving her would ruin him or save him. He only knew he couldn't walk away. If you want to see how one reckless choice turned a dying farm into a battleground, stay with me to the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The homestead squatted on the eastern slope of the Bitterroot Range, like something the land had tried to shake off and failed. Silas Mercer stood in the doorway of his cabin, coffee going cold in his tin cup, staring at rows of stunted wheat that looked more like weeds than a crop. 6 years he'd worked this patch of Montana dirt. 6 years of plowing, planting, praying to nothing in particular, and watching everything come up short. His nearest neighbor was 4 miles down the mountain. The town of Ember Flat sat another 8 miles past that, tucked into a valley where the soil was darker and the water ran easier. Silas had chosen this high ground because it was cheap and because after the war he'd wanted distance from people. He got what he paid for. The land was hard. The winters were brutal, and the only thing that grew reliably was his own bitterness. He dumped the coffee into the dirt and went back inside. The cabin was small. 1 room. A stove that smoked when the wind turned. A table he'd built himself that sat uneven no matter how many times he shaved the legs. A bed in the corner that still smelled faintly of the pine he'd cut to make it. He kept the place clean out of habit, not hope. There was no one coming to see it, no one who cared. He pulled on his coat, checked the rifle above the door, and decided he didn't need it. Town was safer than his own thoughts most days. The ride down took an hour. His horse, a gray mare named Constance, picked her way through the rocks without much guidance. Silas let his mind drift. He thought about his brother, dead 4 years now in a logging accident up north. He thought about the farm they were supposed to work together, the plan that died the same day Samuel did. He thought about how a man could survive a war and still lose everything that mattered after. Ember Flats didn't have much to recommend it. A general store, a livery, a land office that smelled like mildew and broken promises, and the Rosewood Saloon, which was neither rose-covered nor made of decent wood, but it served whiskey that didn't taste like kerosene, so men came. Silas tied Constance outside and pushed through the door. The place was loud. A piano in the corner played something that might have been a hymn once before someone forgot half the notes. Men crowded around tables, cards in hand, coins and crumpled bills scattered like leaves. Smoke hung thick enough to taste. Silas moved to the bar and ordered a drink. Mercer. The bartender, a man named Clyde with a scar that split his eyebrow, slid a glass across the wood. Heard your field's looking rough again. Silas didn't answer. He drank. A lot of folks saying that high ground's cursed. A lot of folks talk too much. Clyde shrugged and moved on to another customer. Silas nursed his whiskey and tried to ignore the noise. He was halfway through the glass when the room shifted. It wasn't loud. It was the opposite. A pocket of silence opened up near the back, the kind that happens when something ugly is about to unfold and everyone wants to see it. Silas turned. A man stood in the center of the room, tall and rangy, with a face that looked like it had been carved with a dull blade. His coat was filthy. His boots were split at the seams. He had one hand on the shoulder of a woman, gripping her like she might bolt if he let go. The woman didn't move. She was thin, pale. Her dress was torn at the hem and stained with God knew what. Her hair hung loose and tangled around her face, dark enough to look black in the low light. She didn't look at anyone, just stared at the floor. "Gentlemen," the man said, his voice carrying over the piano, "I find myself in a position of need." Someone laughed. The man grinned, showing teeth that had seen better years. "I'm traveling west and my funds have run a bit thin, but I'm a man of resources." He shook the woman slightly. She swayed but didn't react. "This here's Vivian. She's strong, she's quiet, and she can work. I'm offering her services to anyone willing to stake a reasonable sum." The room erupted. Men jeered. Someone threw a peanut shell. A voice from the corner shouted, "What are we supposed to do with her? Teach her tricks." More laughter. The man's grin widened. She's yours for the night, the week, however long you want, long as the price is right. Hell, I'll even throw in a bill of transfer if you want to keep her permanent. Silas felt his hand tighten around the glass. The woman, Vivian, still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. She stood there like something already broken, and the room fed on it. I'll start the bidding at $10, the man said. $5, someone countered, laughing. $3, and that's generous. The man's face darkened, but he kept his voice light. Come now, boys, she's worth more than your spare tobacco money. Silas set his glass down. He didn't plan it, didn't think it through. He just opened his mouth and heard himself say, 20. The room went quiet again. The man turned, squinting through the smoke. Who said that? Silas stepped forward. I did. $20. The man looked him up and down. You got $20, friend? Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. He dumped the contents on the nearest table. Bills and coins scattered. It wasn't much. It was everything he had left after buying seed for a crop that probably wouldn't grow. Count it, Silas said. The man moved closer, his eyes narrowing. He picked through the money, his lips moving as he tallied. Finally, he looked up. This is 18. Then I owe you 2. That's not how this works. Silas met his gaze. You want the money or not? For a moment, the man looked like he might argue. Then he glanced around the room, saw the faces watching, and seemed to decide it wasn't worth the fight. He scooped up the bills and coins, shoving them into his pocket. She's all yours, he said, and he let go of Vivian's shoulder. She didn't move. The man tipped his hat, grinning again. Pleasure doing business. He turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. Silas stood there, the weight of what he'd just done settling over him like a wet coat. The room buzzed with whispers. Men turned back to their cards, their drinks, already forgetting. Vivian still hadn't moved. Silas walked over to her slowly, the way you'd approach a spooked animal. Up close, he could see the bruises on her wrists, the dirt caked under her nails, the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller. You got a name? He asked quietly. She didn't answer. He called you Vivian, that right? Nothing. Silas exhaled. All right, come on. He started toward the door. After a moment, he heard footsteps behind him. Light, hesitant, but following. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold. Constance huffed and stamped, annoyed at the delay. Silas untied her and glanced back at Vivian. She stood in the doorway of the saloon, backlit by the greasy yellow light. She looked like a ghost. You know how to ride? Silas asked. She shook her head. You're going to have to learn quick, or we're walking 4 hours in the dark. He swung into the saddle and held out his hand. She stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached up and took it. Her hand was cold, thin. He pulled her up behind him, and she settled awkwardly onto the horse's back, gripping the edge of the saddle like it might throw her. Hold on to me, Silas said. You fall off. I'm not coming back for you. It was a lie. But she didn't need to know that. They rode in silence. The town fell away behind them, swallowed by the dark. The trail climbed steadily, winding through scrub pine and stone. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, casting just enough light to see by. Silas felt her grip tighten as the trail grew steeper. She didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going, just held on. He didn't know what the hell he was doing, didn't know what he was supposed to do with a woman he'd bought for $18 and a bad conscience. He only knew that leaving her there wasn't an option. The cabin appeared just after midnight, a dark shape against the darker mountain. Silas reined Constance to a stop and dismounted. He turned to help Vivian down, but she was already sliding off on her own, landing unsteadily on the ground. Inside, Silas said, nodding toward the door. She followed him in. He struck a match and lit the lamp on the table. Warm light filled the small space, pushing back the shadows. Vivian stood just inside the door, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked around the cabin slowly, taking in the stove, the table, the bed in the corner. You can sleep there, Silas said, gesturing to the bed. I'll take the floor. She turned to look at him. For the first time, he saw her eyes clearly. They were green, sharp, not empty the way he'd expected. You ain't gonna hurt me? She asked. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it in a while. No. Why not? Silas set the lamp down. Because I'm not that kind of man. She studied him for a long moment, and he had the unsettling feeling she was seeing straight through him. Then she nodded, just once, and moved to the bed. She sat on the edge of it, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't lie down, just sat there, staring at the floor again. Silas pulled a blanket from the chest near the stove and spread it on the floor near the door. He lay down, boots still on, and stared at the ceiling. "There's food in the cupboard if you're hungry," he said. "Water in the bucket by the stove." No response. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't settle. He kept thinking about the way the men had laughed, the way she'd stood there, silent and still, while they decided what she was worth. He'd spent $18 he didn't have, brought a stranger into his home. And for what? He didn't have an answer, just a feeling in his gut that if he'd walked away, he'd have lost something he couldn't name. Somewhere in the dark, he heard her shift on the bed. The ropes creaked under the thin mattress. "Thank you," she said quietly. Silas opened his eyes. "Don't thank me yet." "Why not? You don't know what kind of mess you just walked into." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can't be worse than the one I walked out of." Silas didn't argue. He lay there until exhaustion finally pulled him under, and when he woke just before dawn, the first thing he saw was Vivian standing at the window, looking out at his dying field. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were moving, slow and deliberate, like she was reading something written in the dirt. The morning came cold and gray. Silas woke stiff from the floor, his back complaining in 3 different places. He sat up and rubbed his eyes, trying to remember why he felt like he'd made a terrible mistake. Then he saw her. Vivian was outside. He could see her through the window, walking along the edge of his field, her dress dragging through the dirt. She moved slowly, crouching every few feet to touch the soil. Silas pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. The sky was low and heavy, the kind of morning that promised nothing good. Vivian didn't seem to notice. She was kneeling now, sifting dirt through her fingers, holding it up to the light. "What are you doing?" Silas called. She glanced back at him but didn't answer, just turned back to the dirt. He walked over, his irritation rising. "I asked you a question." "Your soil's too acidic," she said. Silas stopped. "What?" "Too acidic, and it's compacted. You've been plowing it the same way every year, turning the same layer over and over. You're killing it." He stared at her. "You don't know what you're talking about." She stood, brushing her hands on her dress. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." "You some kind of farmer?" "No." She looked at him steadily. "But I know soil. I know what it needs. And this," she gestured at the field, "this is dying because you're too stubborn to change." Silas felt his jaw tighten. "I've been working this land for 6 years. And it shows." The words hit harder than they should have. He wanted to argue, to tell her she had no right to judge, but something in her voice stopped him. She wasn't mocking him. She was just stating a fact. "So what are you saying?" he asked. "That I should just give up?" "I'm saying you should try something different." She turned back to the field. "You've got good bones here. The land's not dead, it's just exhausted. You treat it right, it'll come back." "And you know how to do that?" "Yes." Silas didn't know whether to laugh or throw her off his property. Instead, he crossed his arms and said, "All right, show me." She looked at him, surprised. "You think you can fix this mess, prove it, but if you waste my time, you're gone. Understood?" Vivian nodded slowly. Then, for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. It wasn't much, just a flicker at the corner of her mouth, but it changed her face completely. "Get me a shovel," she said. And just like that, Silas Mercer's life stopped being his own. Silas handed her the shovel and watched as she drove it into the earth at an angle he'd never seen anyone use before. She didn't dig, she pierced. Then she leveraged the handle and twisted, opening a pocket in the compacted soil without turning the whole thing over. "What's that supposed to do?" he asked. "Lets it breathe," she said, moving to another spot 3 feet away. "Your dirt's been smothered. Air can't get down to the roots. Water runs off instead of sinking in. You keep plowing the same shallow layer, you're just making concrete." She worked methodically, creating these small wounds across a section of the field, while Silas stood there feeling like an idiot. He'd read books. He'd talked to other farmers. Nobody had ever mentioned anything like this. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked. Vivian paused, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "My mother's people came from farming country back east. Before the war broke everything. She used to say, 'Dirt talks if you know how to listen. Dirt doesn't talk.' No, but it shows you what it needs if you're paying attention." She drove the shovel in again. "Most men don't pay attention." Silas felt the barb but swallowed his irritation. "So what else does it need?" "Organic matter, something to feed the microbes." "You got manure?" "Some, not much." "We'll need more." "And lime. Your soil's acidic enough to pickle leather." "Lime costs money." "So does starving." She looked at him directly. "You want to keep doing what you've been doing and get the same nothing you've been getting? Or you want to try something that might actually work?" He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she had no right to come onto his land and start dictating terms. But the truth was sitting right there in front of him in rows of stunted wheat that wouldn't feed a family of mice. "Fine," he said. "We'll try it your way, but I'm not making promises." "I don't need promises," Vivian said. "I need lime and a lot more space to work." Over the next 3 days, Silas watched his understanding of farming get dismantled piece by piece. Vivian moved through his field like she was performing surgery, testing soil in different areas, marking spots with sticks, explaining things he only half understood about nitrogen cycles and root structures, and something called companion planting that sounded like superstition until she showed him how it worked. She sent him into town twice. Once for lime, which cost him $4 he absolutely didn't have. Once for specific seeds he'd never heard of, things like clover and vetch, that she said would fix nitrogen in the soil over winter. "I plant wheat here," Silas protested, "not weeds." "You plant these first, plow them under in spring, then plant wheat. The soil will be twice as fertile." "That's a whole season lost. That's a whole future gained." She didn't look up from the furrow she was marking. "You can keep chasing this year's crop and failing, or you can invest in next year and actually succeed. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. They both knew it. By the end of the first week, Silas's field looked like it had been worked by someone who knew what they were doing, and it made him feel things he wasn't ready to examine. Pride, maybe. Or hope. Both were dangerous. Vivian worked from dawn until dark, stopping only when Silas forced food on her. She ate like someone who'd forgotten meals were supposed to happen regularly, fast and focused, then back to work. At night, she still took the bed. Silas still took the floor. They didn't talk much. She didn't offer details about her past, and he didn't ask. It felt like an unspoken agreement. The present was complicated enough, but on the 8th night, after a supper of beans and cornbread, she broke the silence. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. Silas looked up from the pan he was scrubbing. "Do what?" "Buy me. You didn't know me. Didn't know if I'd be worth the trouble." He set the pan down and dried his hands on a rag. Didn't seem right, letting that happen. Lots of things aren't right. Most people don't step in. Most people are cowards. She almost smiled. Or smart. "You could have walked away with your money." "I've done a lot of things I regret," Silas said quietly. Didn't want to add that to the list. Vivian nodded slowly. She looked down at her hands, which were raw and blistered from the work. "That man who had me. His name was Garrick. I was with him for 2 years. Silas went still. He hadn't expected this. "He bought me off a wagon train after my family died. Cholera. Said he'd take care of me, find me work. Instead, he dragged me from town to town, hiring me out for labor, taking every cent." Her voice was flat, like she was reciting a list. "When the work dried up, he decided I was worth more as a gambling stake than a field hand." "I'm sorry," Silas said, because he didn't know what else to say. "Don't be. I'm here now." "That's better." She met his eyes. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not staying because I owe you. I'm staying because this is the first place I've been in years where someone's not treating me like property." "You don't owe me anything," Silas said. "I know. That's why I'm telling you." They sat in the quiet for a while, the stove ticking as it cooled. Finally, Vivian stood and went to the window. "Your field's going to produce next year," she said. "If we do this right, you'll have the best yield on this mountain." That's a bold claim. It's a fact, you'll see. And against all reason, Silas believed her. By the third week, word had started to spread. Silas didn't know how. He hadn't been to town. But Montana was small, and news traveled through the hills like wildfire, whether you wanted it to or not. The first visitor came on a cold Tuesday morning. Silas was hauling water from the creek when he saw the rider coming up the trail. A man on a mule, moving slow and uncertain. Silas set the buckets down and waited. The man dismounted a few yards from the cabin. He was older, maybe 60, with a face like worn leather and hands that shook slightly when he removed his hat. "Name's Howell," the man said. "Got a place about 6 miles south of here." "I know who you are," Silas said. Howell ran sheep, kept to himself. "What do you want?" Howell glanced past him toward the field, where Vivian was working. "Heard you got someone up here who knows about soil, fixing things that won't grow." Silas frowned. "Who told you that?" "Clyde. From the saloon. Said you brought home a woman who's been turning your land around." Howell twisted his hat in his hands. "My pasture's been dying for 3 years. Grass won't come in thick anymore. Sheep are getting thin. I heard maybe she could look at it." Silas didn't know what to say. He glanced back at Vivian, who'd stopped working and was watching them.
Your worth is right
"She's busy,"
here,
Silas
planting
said.
this tree.
"I can pay." "It's not about money. Please." Howell's voice cracked slightly. "I got nothing else. If I lose those sheep, I lose everything." Vivian walked over, wiping her hands on her dress. "What's wrong with your pasture?" she asked. Howell looked at her, surprised she'd spoken. "It's patchy, bare spots spreading. Nothing I do helps." "You been overgrazing?" "Maybe. I don't know. I just know it's dying." Vivian studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Silas. "I can go look. Won't take more than a few hours." "You don't have to do that," Silas said. "I know, but I'm going to." Howell's face flooded with relief. "I'll pay whatever's fair." "You'll pay nothing until I figure out if I can help," Vivian said. "And if I can, we'll talk terms." They rode out that afternoon, Vivian on Constance and Silas walking alongside. Howell led them down through a narrow valley to a stretch of land that looked worse than Silas's field had. The grass was sparse and yellow. The ground was cracked in places, muddy in others. Vivian dismounted and walked the pasture slowly, kneeling every few yards to examine the soil. She pulled up handfuls of grass, inspected the roots, smelled the dirt. "You're compacting it," she said finally. "Too many sheep on too little land. And you've got drainage problems. Water's pooling in the low spots, drowning the roots. In the high spots, it's running off and taking the topsoil with it." Howell's shoulders sagged. "So it's hopeless." "No, it's fixable, but you're going to have to rest half this pasture for a season, rotate your flock, and we need to dig some shallow channels to redirect the water. That'll take weeks. Then you better start soon." Howell looked like he might cry. "I can't do that kind of work anymore. My back's shot." Vivian glanced at Silas. He knew what she was thinking before she said it. "We'll help," Silas said, against every instinct that told him not to. "I can't ask you to do that," Howell said. "You're not asking. We're offering." They worked on Howell's land for 5 days. Silas dug channels while Vivian directed the placement, adjusting angles and depths with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. Howell worked as much as his body would allow, mostly hauling rocks and clearing debris. On the 4th day, another rider appeared. A woman this time, younger, with 2 small children clinging to her saddle. Her name was Margaret Lorne, and her husband had died the previous winter. She'd been trying to keep their vegetable plot alive, but everything kept withering. "Heard there's a woman up here who can read the dirt," Margaret said, her voice tight with desperation. "Is that true?" Vivian straightened from the channel she was inspecting. "What's your trouble?" "Everything I plant dies. Beans, squash, potatoes, all of it. The soil looks fine, but nothing grows." "Where's your plot?" 2 miles west, near the old mill." Vivian wiped sweat from her face and looked at Silas. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else. A kind of fire. "We'll come tomorrow," Vivian said. Margaret's garden was worse than she'd described. The soil was gray and lifeless, the plants stunted and spotted with disease. Vivian walked the rows, touching leaves, digging into the dirt with her bare hands. "Your water's contaminated," she said. "You're pulling from the creek downstream of the old mill. There's something leaching into it. Probably metals from the machinery they abandoned." Margaret's face went pale. What do I do? Dig a new well, uphill from the mill, and you'll need to flush this soil. It's poisoned. I don't have money for a well. Then we dig it ourselves, Vivian said. But you're not using that creek water anymore. Not for drinking, not for watering, not for anything. They dug the well over the next week. Silas had never worked so hard in his life. His hands bled, his back screamed. But Vivian worked beside him hour after hour, and he couldn't stop while she kept going. When the well finally struck clean water, Margaret wept. After that, they came in a steady stream. Farmers and ranchers and desperate homesteaders who'd heard rumors of a woman on the mountain who could fix broken land. They came with dying crops and barren fields and livestock that wouldn't thrive. And Vivian met each one with the same calm assessment, the same willingness to help. Silas tried to keep track of who they'd helped and where. Howell, Margaret Lorne, a man named Tate who raised hogs, a family called the Bishops whose orchard was failing, a young couple trying to start a dairy. Every time Vivian diagnosed the problem with a certainty that seemed impossible. Soil too alkaline, nutrient depletion, poor drainage, pest infestations. She knew the answers before she finished asking the questions. And every time she refused payment until the work was done. You're giving away everything for free, Silas told her one night as they rode back to the cabin. We're running out of time to fix our own place. These people need help, Vivian said. So do we. We're fine. We're broke. She looked at him, her face unreadable in the fading light. When I was with Garrick, I had nothing, no choices, no voice. Every day was about survival, and I had no control over any of it. Her voice was quiet but steady. Now I have a choice. I can help people or I can hoard what I know, and I'm choosing to help. Silas wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because he understood. Maybe better than he wanted to admit. Just don't kill yourself doing it, he said. I won't. But she was lying. He could see it in the way she moved now, slower than before, in the way she winced when she thought he wasn't looking. She was burning herself out, and there was nothing he could say to stop it. The first snow came early that year, dusting the high ground in late October. Silas woke to find the world outside covered in white, the air sharp and clear. He built up the fire and put coffee on, then noticed Vivian wasn't in bed. He found her outside, standing in the field they'd worked so hard to rehabilitate. She was barefoot, her dress damp from the snow, staring at the ground. "What are you doing?" Silas called. "You'll freeze." She didn't respond, just kept staring. He walked over, his boots crunching through the thin layer of snow. "Vivian." "It's working," she said softly. He followed her gaze. Beneath the snow, he could see the faint green of new growth. The cover crops she'd planted were coming in thick and healthy, their roots stabilizing the soil. "It's actually working," she said again, and her voice broke. Silas looked at her and saw tears on her face, not sad tears. Something else. "You doubted it?" he asked. "Every single day." She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I knew the theory. I knew what should happen. But I've been wrong before. I failed before. I thought maybe this time would be the same. It's not." She turned to look at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked young, vulnerable. "What if it doesn't last? What if something goes wrong?" "Then we fix it," Silas said, "same way we've been fixing everything else." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. They went back inside, and Silas made her sit by the fire while he cooked breakfast. She didn't argue, just sat there, staring at her hands. "You need to rest," Silas said, setting a plate in front of her. "You've been running yourself into the ground for weeks. People need help. People can wait." "No, they can't." She looked up at him. "Winter's coming. If we don't finish Tate's drainage system before the ground freezes, his whole operation floods in spring. If we don't help the Bishops prune their orchard properly, they lose half their trees. If we don't—" "Stop," Silas said. "Just stop." She went quiet. "You can't save everyone," he said. "You're one person. You're going to break if you keep this up." "I'm fine." "You're not." He sat down across from her. "And I'm not letting you destroy yourself trying to prove something." "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Then what are you trying to do?" She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to matter." The words hit him harder than he expected. "You matter," he said. To who? Before you, I was something men used and discarded. I had skills and nobody cared. I had knowledge, and it meant nothing because I didn't have power. Now I have a chance to use what I know, to help people, to be more than just something someone owns. Silas didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat there, letting the silence stretch between them. You don't have to earn your place here, he said finally. You already have it. Vivian looked at him, her eyes searching his face. You don't understand. Maybe not, but I know what it's like to feel like you're failing, like everything you do isn't enough. He leaned forward, and I know that killing yourself trying to fix the world won't change that feeling. It'll just kill you. She looked away, and he thought maybe he'd gotten through to her. But then she stood, picked up her plate, and said, I need to check on the Tate property before the weather turns. And he knew he hadn't gotten through at all. The snow melted by midday, but the cold stayed. Silas spent the afternoon splitting wood while Vivian disappeared down the mountain. She came back after dark, her face pale and her hands shaking from cold. Tate's drainage is done, she said. It'll hold. Good. Now get warm before you lose your fingers. She moved to the fire without arguing, which told him how bad she felt. He heated soup and made her eat, then practically forced her into bed. I'm fine, she protested weakly. You're exhausted. Sleep. For once, she listened. Silas sat by the fire, staring at the flames and trying to figure out how his life had become this. 3 months ago, he'd been alone on a dying farm, angry at the world and expecting nothing. Now he had a woman who worked herself half to death helping strangers, a field that was actually growing, and a growing reputation across half the territory as someone who could solve problems nobody else could fix. He should have been happy, should have felt like things were turning around. Instead, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something dangerous, and one wrong step would send everything crashing down. The knock came 3 days later. Silas was outside chopping wood when he heard the horses. 3 riders coming up the trail, moving fast. He set the axe down and waited. The lead rider was a man Silas had seen before but never spoken to. Tall, well-dressed, riding a horse that cost more than most men made in a year. His name was Barrett Crow, and he owned more land in the valley than anyone else. Crow reined his horse to a stop and looked down at Silas with an expression that managed to be both pleasant and condescending. You're Mercer, Crow said. It wasn't a question. I am. I've been hearing interesting things about you, about a woman you've got working miracles up here. Silas felt his jaw tighten. She's not working miracles, just farming. That's not what I've heard. Crow dismounted smoothly, handing his reins to one of his men. I've heard she's fixed 6 failing operations in the last month, turned bad land into good, saved crops people thought were lost. What do you want, Crow? I want to meet her, this woman who's suddenly the talk of the territory. She's busy. I'm sure she can spare a few minutes. Crow smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm a reasonable man, Mercer. I'm willing to pay well for her services. She's not for hire. Everyone's for hire at the right price. The door to the cabin opened and Vivian stepped out. She looked at Crow, then at Silas, reading the tension immediately. Who's this? She asked. Barrett Crow, Crow said, stepping forward with his hand extended. I own the Crow Ranch, largest cattle operation in the territory. Vivian didn't shake his hand. What do you want? Crow's smile flickered but held. I want to hire you. I've got land that's underperforming. Heard you're the person to fix it. I'm not interested. You haven't heard my offer. Don't need to. I'm not interested. Crow's expression hardened slightly. I'm offering top dollar, more than you'd make in a year helping these dirt farmers. I said no. For a moment, Crow just stared at her. Then he looked at Silas. You're letting her turn down good money? She makes her own choices, Silas said. Crow's laugh was cold. Is that what you tell yourself? He turned back to Vivian. You're wasting your talent on people who can't appreciate it. Work for me, and you'd have resources, real support, a future. I have a future, Vivian said. Here? Crow gestured at the cabin, at the rough land around them. With him? You're deluding yourself. You should leave, Silas said, his voice low. Crow looked at him, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. I came here to make a generous offer. I'd hate to think it was a mistake. It was. Now leave. For a long moment, Crow didn't move. Then he smiled again, that cold, empty smile, and mounted his horse. "Think about it," he said to Vivian. "When you realize you're wasting yourself, come find me. The offer stands." He rode away, his men trailing behind him. Silas watched until they disappeared down the trail. "Who is he?" Vivian asked quietly. "Trouble," Silas said. "The kind that doesn't go away when you say no." She looked at him, and he could see she understood. The mountain wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of snow. And somewhere down in the valley, Silas knew Barrett Crow was already planning his next move. Crow came back 2 weeks later, and this time he wasn't alone. Silas was in town buying supplies when he saw them. Crow stood outside the land office with 3 men in suits, the kind who looked like they'd never touched dirt in their lives. They were passing papers between them, pointing at a map spread across a table someone had dragged into the street. Silas kept his head down and walked past, but Crow's voice stopped him. "Mercer. A word." Silas turned slowly. Crow was smiling, but it was the smile of a man who'd already won something. "I'm busy," Silas said. This won't take long." Crow gestured to the men. "I'm acquiring some new properties, consolidating holdings, building something bigger than what these small operations can manage on their own." "Good for you. One of those properties is adjacent to yours. Thought you might be interested in selling. Save yourself the trouble of bad neighbors." Silas felt his stomach tighten. "I'm not selling. You haven't heard my offer." "Don't need to." Crow's smile thinned. "You're making a mistake. Land values are about to shift in this area. You could walk away with enough to start fresh somewhere easier." "I don't want easier. I want what's mine. What's yours is a patch of rock that barely grows weeds." Crow leaned closer. "But that woman you've got, she's turned it into something people notice. That makes it valuable. And valuable things attract attention." "She's not property," Silas said, his voice harder now. "And neither is my land. Everything's property if you know how to claim it." Crow straightened, brushing invisible dust from his coat. "Think about it. Before you find yourself on the wrong side of a situation you can't control." He walked away before Silas could respond, his men gathering the papers and following. Silas stood there, his hands clenched, trying to calm the anger rising in his chest. When he got back to the cabin, Vivian was working in the field, reinforcing the irrigation channels she'd designed. She looked up when she heard Constance, then saw his face. "What happened?" she asked. "Crow's buying land around us. Says he's consolidating." She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. "He trying to box us in?" "Maybe. Or he's just being a bastard because he can." Silas dismounted and started unloading supplies. "He wanted me to sell. Said land values are shifting." "Are you going to?" "No." Vivian nodded, but he could see worry in her eyes. "He's not going to let this go. Men like him don't." "I know." "Then we need to be ready." "For what?" She looked at him steadily. "For whatever he does next." What Crow did next came 3 days later, and it wasn't what Silas expected. A man arrived at the cabin just after dawn. He wore a badge and carried papers that looked official. His name was Deputy Marshal Haynes, and his face had the worn look of someone who'd delivered bad news too many times. "I'm looking for a woman named Vivian Hale," Haynes said. Silas stepped between him and the cabin door. "What for?" "I've got a writ here. Legal claim of ownership filed by a Mr. Garrick Stern. Says she's his property, purchased legally 2 years ago, and he wants her returned." The words hit Silas like a fist. "That's insane. You can't own a person." "Not anymore, no, but the paperwork says she was purchased before the war ended, when such transactions were still legal in certain territories. Says she ran away, and he's within his rights to retrieve her." "That's a lie," Silas said. "She wasn't purchased. She was coerced. And even if she was, the war's been over for years. That claim is worthless." "Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. That's for a judge to decide." Haynes looked uncomfortable. "I'm just here to serve the writ and bring her in for a hearing." "Like hell you are." Haynes sighed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Mercer. I don't like this any more than you do, but I've got a job to do." The cabin door opened. Vivian stepped out, her face pale but calm. "It's fine," she said quietly. "I'll go." "No," Silas said. "You're not going anywhere. If I don't, they'll arrest you for obstruction. Then we both lose." She looked at Haynes. When's the hearing? 3 days. In Ember Flats. Then I'll be there. Haynes hesitated, then nodded. I'm supposed to take you into custody now. I'm not running. You have my word. Your word doesn't mean much legally. It's all you're getting, Vivian said. Unless you want to drag me down that mountain in chains and explain to everyone watching why you're treating an innocent woman like a criminal. Haynes looked between them, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he folded the papers and tucked them into his coat. 3 days, he said. If you're not there, I'll come back with a warrant and enough men to make sure you don't have a choice. He left, and Silas watched him go, his mind racing. This is Crow, he said. He couldn't buy you, so he's trying to take you legally. Probably. Vivian's voice was steady, but he could see her hands shaking. Garrick wouldn't have filed this on his own. He doesn't have the resources. Someone paid him. Then we fight it. We get a lawyer. We show the judge this whole thing is fabricated. With what money? We're barely scraping by as it is. I don't care. We'll figure it out. Vivian looked at him, and something in her expression softened. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Why? I'm not your responsibility. You're not a responsibility, Silas said. He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. I'm what? He looked at her, this woman who'd walked into his life 3 months ago and turned everything upside down, who'd taken his dying land and made it live, who worked herself to exhaustion helping people she didn't know, who stood there now, facing the possibility of being dragged back into slavery and still had the strength to stay calm. You're someone I'm not willing to lose, he said finally. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Then we'd better figure out how to win. They rode into Ember Flats the next morning to find a lawyer. The town had 2. One was drunk by noon most days. The other was a sharp-eyed man named Aldridge, who listened to their story with increasing skepticism. The claim's probably fraudulent, Aldridge said, leaning back in his chair. But proving it will be difficult. If Stern has paperwork that looks legitimate, and if it predates the territorial amendments, a judge might honor it just to avoid setting precedent. So what do we do? Silas asked. You need to prove the documents are forged, or you need to invalidate his claim another way. Aldridge tapped his fingers on the desk. The simplest solution would be to marry her. Silas blinked. What? Marriage transfers legal status. If she's your wife, Stern's claim becomes void. He can't own someone who's legally bound to another free citizen. Vivian was very still. That's your advice? Get married? It's the fastest way to protect her. Anything else will take months and cost more than you can afford. Aldridge looked at them both. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying it's effective. Silas looked at Vivian. She was staring at the wall, her expression unreadable. Can we think about it? Silas asked. You've got 2 days before the hearing. I'd think fast.
Your worth is right here.
They left the office and walked through town in silence. Finally, Vivian spoke. It's not a real solution, she said. It's just trading one form of ownership for another. It's not ownership. Marriage is a partnership. Is it? Or is it just a legal structure that gives you authority over me instead of Stern? She stopped walking and turned to face him. I've spent 2 years being property. I'm not doing it again, even if the paperwork looks different. That's not what I'm suggesting. Then what are you suggesting? Silas struggled to find the right words. I'm suggesting we do whatever it takes to keep you free. If that means marriage, fine. But it doesn't change anything between us. You still make your own choices. You still do what you want. The paper's just protection. Paper didn't protect me before. This is different. How? Because I'm not Garrick, and I'm not Crow. He met her eyes. I bought you out of that saloon because I couldn't stand watching what was happening to you. I'm offering this for the same reason, not because I want to own you, because I want you to have a choice. Vivian looked at him for a long time. And what if I say no? Then we find another way. What if there isn't one? Then we lose. But at least we lose on our terms. She was quiet. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, we'll do it. But I need you to understand something. What? This doesn't mean I trust you completely. It doesn't mean I think marriage makes us equal. It just means I trust you more than I trust the law to protect me. It wasn't a romantic declaration. It was barely even an acceptance. But it was honest, and Silas respected that more than any pretty words could have conveyed. That's enough, he said. They married the next day in the land office, with Aldridge as witness and a clerk who looked bored through the entire 5-minute ceremony. There were no rings, no flowers, no celebration, just papers signed and filed, creating a legal barrier between Vivian and anyone who might try to claim her. When it was done, they walked out into the cold afternoon, and Silas felt like he'd just stepped off a cliff without knowing how far the fall would be. "You all right?" he asked. Vivian looked at the marriage certificate in her hands. "Ask me after the hearing." The hearing took place in the town hall, a drafty building that smelled like old wood and older grudges. Stern was there, looking cleaner than he had in the saloon, but no less dangerous. He had a lawyer, a slick man named Poole, who smiled too much. Crow was there too, sitting in the back row like a spectator at a show he'd paid to see. Judge Whitmore was an older man with white hair and the kind of face that gave nothing away. He reviewed the documents Stern's lawyer presented, then looked at Vivian. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, and Vivian flinched slightly at the name. "Mr. Stern claims you were legally purchased in 1863 under territorial law that was in effect at the time. He has a bill of sale and witnesses to the transaction. Do you dispute this?" "I dispute that any transaction could make me property," Vivian said. "Then or now?" "The law at the time said otherwise." The law was wrong. Whitmore's expression didn't change. "Be that as it may, we're here to determine whether Mr. Stern's claim has legal standing, not to debate the morality of historical legislation." Aldridge stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer is now married. Any prior claim is invalidated by her change in legal status." Poole stood smoothly. The marriage occurred after the writ was filed. It's clearly a fraudulent attempt to evade legal obligation. There's no fraud in two people choosing to marry. There is when the sole purpose is to circumvent a legitimate claim. Whitmore held up a hand. "Enough. The timing is suspicious, I'll grant you that. But marriage is marriage, regardless of motivation. Unless you can prove the union is a sham, Mr. Poole, I'm inclined to recognize it." Poole's smile widened. "Then I'd like to call Mr. Mercer to the stand." Silas felt his stomach drop. Aldridge shot him a look, but there was nothing to be done. He stood and walked to the front, swearing an oath he barely heard. Poole approached him like a wolf circling prey. "Mr. Mercer, how long have you known Mrs. Mercer?" 3 months. 3 months? And in that time, did you develop romantic feelings for her?" Silas hesitated. The truth was complicated, and he didn't know how to explain it without making things worse. "I care about her," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked. Did you fall in love with her?" "I respect her." Again, not an answer. "Let me be clear. Did you marry Vivian Hale because you wanted to spend your life with her, or because you wanted to protect her from Mr. Stern's legal claim?" The courtroom was silent. Silas looked at Vivian, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "Both," he said finally. "Both," Poole repeated. "How convenient. Tell me, Mr. Mercer, have you consummated this marriage?" Aldridge shot to his feet. "Objection. That's completely inappropriate." "It's relevant," Poole said smoothly. "If this is a real marriage, there should be evidence of a genuine union. If it's a legal fiction created to evade Mr. Stern's claim, that's fraud." Whitmore frowned. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Poole." Poole turned back to Silas. "Have you consummated the marriage?" Silas felt heat rising in his face. "No." "No. So you married this woman, claimed her as your wife, but you haven't actually acted as husband and wife. It's been 1 day. 1 day in which you could have solidified your union but chose not to. Sounds to me like this marriage is exactly what it appears to be. A desperate legal maneuver with no real substance." Aldridge stood again. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Plenty of marriages aren't consummated immediately. That doesn't make them invalid." "It does when combined with the timing, the circumstances, and the clear motivation to defraud a legal claim," Poole said. He looked at Whitmore. "This marriage is a sham, and everyone in this room knows it." Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Vivian. "Mrs. Mercer, do you love your husband?" Vivian stood slowly. Every eye in the room was on her. "I don't know," she said. The honesty of it seemed to catch everyone off guard. "I don't know if I love him," she continued. "I know I trust him more than any man I've met. I know he's treated me with more respect in 3 months than most men have in my entire life. I know that when he had the chance to use me the way every other man has, he didn't. So maybe that's not love. Maybe it's just basic decency. But it's more than I've gotten anywhere else, and it's enough to build something on. She looked at Silas. If this marriage is a sham, it's because the law forced it to be. We didn't want to get married to prove anything. We did it because it was the only way to keep me from being dragged back into hell. And if that makes us frauds, then the fraud is the system that made marriage the only option. The room was silent. Even Poole seemed momentarily at a loss. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. I'm going to take a recess. I'll have a decision in 1 hour. They waited outside, Silas pacing while Vivian sat on a bench, her hands folded in her lap. Aldridge smoked a cigarette and said nothing. The hours stretched like a day. When they were finally called back in, Whitmore was already seated. His expression gave nothing away. I've reviewed the documents, considered the testimony, and weighed the arguments on both sides, he said. Mr. Stern's claim is legally sound based on the laws in effect at the time of the alleged transaction. However, Mrs. Mercer's marriage to Mr. Mercer creates a new legal reality that supersedes the prior claim. Silas felt a surge of relief, but Whitmore wasn't done. That said, I share Mr. Poole's concerns about the timing and nature of this union. Therefore, I'm ruling that the marriage stands and Mr. Stern's claim is dismissed. However, I'm issuing a provisional order. If, within 6 months, evidence emerges that this marriage is indeed fraudulent, Mrs. Mercer's legal status will revert and Mr. Stern's claim will be reconsidered. Vivian went pale. Silas felt his relief curdle into something cold. What kind of evidence? Aldridge asked. Testimony from credible witnesses, evidence of separation or abandonment, proof that the marriage was entered into under false pretenses. Whitmore looked at them both. Essentially, you have 6 months to prove this is a real marriage. If you can't, we'll revisit this matter. He banged the gavel, and it was done. They walked out into the fading afternoon light, and Silas felt like he'd won a battle only to realize the war had just started. 6 months, Vivian said quietly. He's giving them 6 months to find a way to tear this apart. Then we don't give them anything to find. How? We're not a real married couple. People will notice. Then we act like one. She looked at him. What does that mean? It means we make it real. Not for the judge, not for Crow or Stern. For us. He stopped walking and faced her. You said this was the only way to keep you free. Fine. Then we commit to it. We make this marriage something they can't attack because it's exactly what it's supposed to be. And what's it supposed to be? A partnership. 2 people choosing to build something together. Vivian studied his face. You're asking me to trust you with my entire future. I'm asking you to trust yourself to build a future worth having. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. All right, she said. Partners. He took her hand and they shook on it like a business deal, which in some ways it was. But standing there in the cold Montana twilight, Silas felt like he'd just made a promise that would define the rest of his life. They rode back to the cabin in silence, both of them processing what had just happened. When they arrived, Vivian dismounted and went straight to the field, examining the crops with the same focused intensity she always had. Silas watched her for a moment, then went inside to start a fire. He was pulling out the coffee pot when he heard the horses. He stepped outside and saw them coming up the trail. 4 riders. Moving fast. As they got closer, he recognized the lead horse, Crow. Silas's hand moved instinctively toward where his rifle would be, then remembered he'd left it inside. He was halfway to the door when Crow and his men reined to a stop. Congratulations on your marriage, Crow said, his voice dripping with mockery. Quite the romantic gesture. What do you want? Silas asked. Just came to deliver some news. I've acquired the property to your south, the Tate place, paid off his debts, and took ownership yesterday. Silas felt his blood run cold. Tate was one of the farmers Vivian had helped. The drainage system they'd built had saved his operation. Tate wouldn't sell, Silas said. He didn't have a choice. He borrowed money from the wrong people, and I bought the debt. Now I own his land, and he's got 30 days to clear out. Crow smiled. Thought you should know, since we're neighbors now. You son of a... Careful, Mercer. Threatening a landowner in front of witnesses is a bad idea. Crow leaned forward in his saddle. You and your wife think you're clever, playing house, helping the locals, building your little reputation, but you're in over your heads. We're not doing anything wrong. That's debatable. See, I've been asking around about Vivienne. Interesting woman, knows things she shouldn't, works too hard for someone who's supposedly a free agent. Makes a man wonder if maybe she's got secrets worth uncovering. Vivienne appeared from the field, her face hard. You got something to say. Say it. Crow's smile widened. Just that the judge gave you 6 months. That's a long time. A lot can happen. People can disappear, accidents can occur, marriages can fall apart. Is that a threat? Silas asked. It's a prediction. Crow gathered his reins. Enjoy your honeymoon, Mrs. Mercer. I imagine it'll be the last peace you get for a while. He rode off, his men following, leaving Silas and Vivienne standing in the gathering darkness. He's going to come after us, Vivienne said. He's going to find a way to break this. Let him try. Silas, he owns half the valley now. He has money. He has influence. What do we have? Silas looked at her, then at the field they'd brought back to life, at the cabin that had stopped feeling empty, at the life they were trying to build against every odd stacked against them. We have each other, he said, and we have the people we've helped. That's got to count for something. Vivienne didn't look convinced, but she nodded. They went inside and Silas locked the door for the first time since he'd built the place. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow and the promise of a long, hard winter. The first sign of Crow's next move came a week later when Howell showed up at the cabin, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Silas was splitting wood when he heard the mule's labored breathing on the trail. Howell dismounted stiffly, his face gray. They came for my land, Howell said without preamble. Crow's men. Said I owe taxes I can't pay. Said if I don't come up with $300 by the end of the month, they're seizing the property. Silas set down the axe. You don't owe taxes. You paid them in September. That's what I told them. They showed me papers saying otherwise. Official-looking things with stamps and signatures. Howell's hand shook. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't have $300. I don't have 30. Vivienne emerged from the cabin, flour on her hands from the bread she'd been making. She listened as Howell repeated the story, her expression darkening. It's fraud, she said flatly. Crow's manufacturing debt to force people off their land. Can he do that? Howell asked. He can if nobody stops him. She looked at Silas. We need to see those papers. They rode to Howell's place and examined the documents. They looked legitimate at first glance. Official seals, proper formatting, signed by a tax assessor named Grimsby. But Vivienne spotted the problem almost immediately. These dates are wrong, she said, pointing. This says you owe for the third quarter, but you already paid that. And this signature, she held it up to the light. It's been traced over something else. See how the ink pools here? Someone copied Grimsby's signature from another document. How do you know that? Howell asked. I've seen forged papers before. Her voice was quiet. Garrick used to do it all the time. Bill of sales, work contracts, anything he needed to make his lies look official. Silas felt something cold settle in his stomach. If Howell's papers are forged, how many others has Crow done this to? Tate's probably were, Vivienne said, and anyone else he's acquired property from in the last few months. So we prove they're fake. We go to the marshal. Howell shook his head. Marshal's office is in the county seat, 40 miles from here. And even if we get there, who's going to believe us over Crow? He's got money. He's got connections. We're just dirt farmers. Then we find the real tax records, Vivienne said. Compare them to these forgeries. Show the discrepancies. Records are kept in the land office, Silas said, in Ember Flats. Then that's where we go. They rode into town the next morning, but the land office clerk, a nervous man named Petrie, refused to let them see the records without authorization. I can't just hand over official documents to anyone who asks, Petrie said, sweat beading on his forehead. There are procedures. We're not asking for all of them, Silas said. Just the tax records for Howell's property. He has a right to see what he allegedly owes. Mr. Crow has filed a claim on that property. Until it's resolved, the records are sealed. Vivienne leaned across the counter. Crow got to you, didn't he? What did he pay you to lock us out? Petrie's face went red. I don't know what you're talking about. You're a terrible liar. How much was it? $50? $100? I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Silas grabbed Vivian's arm before she could say something that would get them both arrested. They walked out into the street, frustration boiling over. He's bought off everyone who matters, Vivian said. The clerk, probably the tax assessor too, maybe even the judge. Whitmore seemed fair. Fair men can be pressured or purchased. Crow's had 6 months to build his case. We've had 6 months to what? Work the land and hope nobody notices? Silas didn't have an answer. She was right, and they both knew it. They were heading back to where they'd tied Constance when Margaret Lorne appeared from the general store, her children trailing behind her. She saw them and quickened her pace. I heard what happened to Howell, Margaret said quietly. Same things happening to the bishops. Tax papers they swear aren't real, debts they don't remember taking on. Crow, Silas said. Margaret nodded. He came to see me last week, said my property would be more valuable if I sold it to him now before the tax situation got complicated. I told him no. Yesterday, I got a notice saying I owe $400 in back assessments. Vivian's jaw tightened. How many people has he done this to? I don't know, but people are scared. Some are talking about just leaving, cutting their losses and heading west before it gets worse. That's what he wants, Vivian said. He's squeezing everyone until they have no choice but to sell for nothing. What can we do? Margaret asked. Fight, Silas said. We get proof that these documents are forged, and we take it to someone who can't be bought. Who? The territorial governor? He's 300 miles away, and Crow probably has connections there too. Silas looked at Vivian. She was staring at the land office, her mind clearly working through something. We don't need the governor, she said slowly. We need the original records, the real ones, before Crow got his hands on them. They're locked in that office, Silas said. Petrie's not letting us anywhere near them. So we don't ask permission. Silas stared at her. You're talking about breaking in. I'm talking about getting evidence before Crow destroys it. You think he's going to leave those records intact once he's seized all the properties he wants? If we get caught, if we don't try, people lose everything. She met his eyes. I know it's a risk, but what choice do we have? Margaret looked between them. If you're going to do this, do it soon. Crow's filing final claims next week. After that, it'll be too late. She left, her children following, and Silas and Vivian stood in the street trying to decide if they were brave or just desperate enough to go through with this. That night, Silas lay on the floor of the cabin staring at the ceiling while Vivian sat at the table sketching the layout of the land office from memory. There's a back window, she said. Small, but I can fit through it. The records room is on the east side. I saw Petrie go in there twice today. You've been planning this since this afternoon, Silas said. I've been planning it since the hearing. I knew Crow wouldn't stop. She looked at him. You don't have to come. This is my fight as much as anyone's. It's our fight, and I'm not letting you break into a government building alone. I work better alone. Too bad. She almost smiled. Then her expression turned serious. If we get caught, you could lose the farm. They'd arrest you for theft. Maybe worse. Everything you've worked for would be gone. And if we don't try, Crow takes it anyway, along with everyone else's land. Silas sat up. I didn't spend 6 years breaking my back on this mountain just to hand it over to some bastard who thinks he can buy the whole territory. Vivian studied him for a moment. You've changed. How? When I met you, you were half dead inside, going through motions. Now you're talking about breaking into buildings and fighting corrupt ranchers. What happened? Silas thought about it. I found something worth fighting for. The land? More than that. He looked at her. You showed me it doesn't have to stay broken. The land, the people, me. All of it can come back if you're willing to do the work. Vivian was quiet. Then she went back to her sketch. We go tomorrow night, late, when Petrie's gone home and the street's empty. What about the deputy? He patrols at night. We wait until he passes, then we move. We'll have maybe 20 minutes before he comes around again. That's not much time. It'll have to be enough. They spent the next day preparing. Silas checked the route from the back of the land office to where they could hide if someone came. Vivian memorized the layout, planning exactly where to look and what to grab. They didn't talk much, both of them keyed up and trying not to show it. As darkness fell, they rode into town and tied Constance behind the livery where she wouldn't be seen. The street was quiet, most people already home for the night. A few lights burned in windows, but the land office was dark. They waited in the alley between the general store and the blacksmith shop, watching the deputy make his rounds. He was a young man, barely 20, more interested in looking official than actually seeing anything. He passed the land office without slowing, his lantern swinging lazily. "Now," Vivian whispered. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. The back window of the land office was exactly where Vivian had said, a small frame that probably hadn't been opened in years. Silas pried it loose with his knife while Vivian kept watch. The window opened with a creak that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. Silas froze, listening, but no one came. Vivian climbed through first, dropping silently into the dark interior. Silas followed, less gracefully, banging his shoulder on the frame and biting back a curse. Inside, the office smelled like dust and old paper. Vivian moved confidently through the darkness, navigating around desks and filing cabinets like she could see in the dark. Silas followed, his heart pounding hard enough he was sure someone would hear it. The records room was locked. Vivian knelt by the door, pulling a thin piece of wire from her sleeve. "Where'd you learn to pick locks?" Silas whispered. "Garrick. He taught me lots of useful skills, most of them illegal." She worked the wire carefully, her ear close to the lock. After a moment, something clicked, and the door swung open. Inside was a wall of filing cabinets and shelves stacked with ledgers. Vivian lit the small candle she'd brought, shielding the flame with her hand. "Tax records should be in the cabinet marked assessments," she said. "Look for anything dated this year." They worked quickly, pulling files and checking dates. Silas found Howell's file first, the real one, showing taxes paid in full through the end of the year. He set it aside and kept looking. "Here's Tate's," Vivian said, "and the Bishop's, all current, all paid." They gathered the files and compared them to the forged documents they'd brought. The differences were clear once you knew what to look for. Different handwriting on the forged versions. Dates that didn't match. Signatures that were close but not quite right. "This is enough," Silas said. "We can prove the forgeries." "Not yet. We need to know how deep this goes." Vivian moved to another cabinet, this one marked property transfers. She pulled files systematically, scanning contents, her face growing grimmer with each one. "How many?" Silas asked. 15 properties, maybe more, all showing debts or tax defaults that don't exist in the real records, all of them acquired by Crow in the last 4 months. She looked at him. "He's been planning this for a while. This isn't opportunistic, it's systematic." Silas felt sick. "We need to get this to someone who can stop him." "Who?" "The marshal's 2 days ride away, and by the time we get there, Crow could have destroyed these records or claimed we stole them. Then we copy them. Make duplicates." "With what? We don't have time to transcribe 15 files." Silas looked around the office, thinking. Then he saw it. A small printing press in the corner, probably used for official notices. "We don't transcribe," he said. "We print." It took them longer than planned. The press was old and finicky, and they had to work by candlelight, trying to keep quiet while the machinery creaked and groaned. But slowly, they produced copies of the key documents, enough to show the pattern of fraud. They were on the last page when they heard footsteps outside. Vivian blew out the candle instantly. They froze in the darkness, listening. The footsteps stopped at the front door. A key turned in the lock. "Petrie," Silas breathed. They gathered the papers frantically, stuffing them into the satchel Vivian had brought. The front door opened. Light from a lantern spilled into the main office. "Who's in here?" Petrie's voice was shaky but loud. "I know someone's here. I can see the windows open." Silas and Vivian moved toward the back room, but Petrie was already crossing the office. They'd never make it to the window before he saw them. Vivian made a decision. She shoved the satchel into Silas's hands and pushed him toward the window. "Go," she whispered. "Get those documents somewhere safe." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to. If we both get caught, this was all for nothing." She met his eyes in the darkness. "Trust me." Before he could argue, she stepped out of the records room into the main office, deliberately knocking over a chair. Petrie spun, his lantern swinging wildly. "You! What are you doing here?" "Looking for answers," Vivian said calmly. Answers you wouldn't give me during business hours. You broke in. That's a crime. I'm calling the deputy. Go ahead. While you're at it, maybe explain why the tax records in your locked cabinet don't match the documents Crow's been using to steal people's land. Petrie's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. How much did he pay you, or did he threaten you? Either way, you're part of this fraud. In the back room, Silas climbed through the window as quietly as he could, the satchel clutched against his chest. He wanted to go back, to help Vivian, but he knew she was right. The documents were more important than either of them. He dropped to the ground and ran. Behind him, he heard Petrie shouting and then another voice, the deputy, responding to the commotion. Silas kept running, cutting through alleys, his lungs burning. He made it to the livery, untied Constance, and rode out of town as fast as the horse could manage in the dark. He didn't stop until he was miles up the mountain trail. Only then did he let himself think about what he'd done. He'd left Vivian behind. She'd sacrificed herself to give him time, and he'd taken it. The smart play. The necessary play. It felt like betrayal anyway. He rode through the night, the satchel pressed against his chest like a lifeline. When he finally reached the cabin, dawn was breaking cold and gray over the mountains. He went inside and spread the documents on the table, looking at the evidence they'd risked everything to obtain. It was damning, clear, irrefutable proof of Crow's systematic fraud. And Vivian was in custody because of it. Silas sat at the table, exhaustion and guilt washing over him in waves. He'd promised to protect her, to be her partner. And the first real test of that promise, he'd run away with papers while she faced arrest. He was still sitting there when he heard horses on the trail. For a wild moment, he thought it might be Vivian, somehow escaped. Then he saw who it actually was and felt his blood turn to ice. Crow rode up with 6 men, all armed. They surrounded the cabin in a loose formation that spoke of experience and intent. Silas stepped outside, leaving the rifle inside. He was outnumbered and outgunned. Violence would only get him killed. Mercer, Crow said, dismounting slowly. I believe you have something that belongs to me. I don't have anything of yours. Don't play stupid. Petrie told me everything. You and your wife broke into the land office. She's in custody. You ran, and you took documents that are property of the territorial government. I took copies of documents that prove you're a fraud and a thief. Crow smiled. That's a serious accusation. You have proof? Right inside. Want to see it? I think I'll pass. See, here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me those papers, all of them, and in exchange I'll consider not pressing charges against you and your wife. You can't press charges. You're not the victim. The people you stole from are. The people I legally acquired property from, you mean. The ones who couldn't pay their debts. Crow's smile widened. Debts that are properly documented and filed with the territory. Documented with forgeries. Prove it. I can. With the papers inside. Papers that were stolen during an illegal break-in? Papers that could have been altered or fabricated by the thieves who took them? Crow shook his head. That's not evidence. That's desperation. Silas felt the trap closing. Crow had thought this through. Even with the documents, without official backing or corroboration, they just looked like criminals trying to justify a crime. What do you want? Silas asked. I told you, the papers. And your wife's knowledge. She works for me, helping my operations increase yield, and I'll make sure the charges against her disappear. She'll never agree to that. She won't have a choice. She's looking at prison time for breaking and entering, theft of government property, conspiracy. I can make those charges stick, or I can make them go away. Depends on how cooperative you both are. And if I refuse? Crow's expression hardened. Then your wife goes to prison. You lose this property for failure to pay your own debts. And yes, I can manufacture those too. And every person you've helped in the last few months loses everything because I'll systematically destroy them until there's nothing left but my land from horizon to horizon. The threat hung in the cold morning air. Silas looked at the men surrounding him, at Crow's confident smile, at the impossible situation they'd walked into. I need time to think, Silas said. You have until sunset. After that, I file formal charges, and you both spend the rest of your lives regretting this mistake. Crow mounted his horse and rode away, his men following. Silas stood there long after they disappeared, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. He went inside and looked at the documents again. They were good. They proved everything, but Crow was right. Without context, without official validation, they were just stolen papers that could have been altered. He needed help, real help, the kind that came with authority and resources he didn't have. The answer came to him slowly, reluctantly. The territorial marshal, the one person who might have the power to investigate Crow's fraud and the jurisdiction to make charges stick. But the marshal's office was 2 days' ride, and Vivian was in custody now. 2 days might as well be a lifetime, unless he could buy time. Silas made a decision he knew he'd regret. He gathered half the documents, enough to be convincing but not enough to prove everything, and rode back to Ember Flats. He found Crow at the Rosewood Saloon, holding court like he owned the place, which Silas realized he probably did. "I'll make a deal," Silas said, dropping the papers on Crow's table. "These documents for Vivian's release. She goes free, and I'll talk to her about working with you." Crow picked up the papers, examined them, then smiled. "You're lying. You'll say anything to get her back, then you'll both disappear." "I'm not lying. I'm buying time to save her. Honest, at least." Crow set the papers down. "But not good enough. I want all the documents, and I want her commitment in writing before she's released. That's not negotiating. That's demanding surrender." "Yes, it is." Crow leaned back. "You're not in a position to bargain, Mercer. You never were." Silas felt fury rising but forced it down. Losing his temper now would only make things worse. "Let me see her," he said. "Let me talk to her. Then I'll get you what you want." Crow considered this. Then he nodded. "You have 10 minutes. Use them wisely." They walked to the small building that served as the town's jail. The deputy unlocked the cell where Vivian sat on a narrow cot, her face bruised and her dress torn. "What happened?" Silas asked, rage flooding through him. "Petrie got brave when he realized I was alone," Vivian said quietly. Deputy stopped him before it got worse. Silas turned to Crow. "You let your clerk assault her? I don't control Petrie's actions, though I understand his frustration." Crow gestured to the deputy. "Give them privacy, but stay close." The deputy stepped outside. Silas moved to the cell bars. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, "not by giving Crow what he wants." Vivian stood, moving stiffly. "Tell me you didn't bring the documents." "I brought some, not all." "Silas, I had to do something. I can't leave you in here." "Yes, you can. You have to." She gripped the bars. "Those documents are the only leverage we have, the only proof. If Crow gets them, he destroys them, and we have nothing. If I don't get you out, you go to prison. Then I go to prison, but at least the truth still exists." Silas shook his head. "No, I'm not accepting that. You have to. This is bigger than me, bigger than us." Her voice cracked. "There are 15 families about to lose everything. You can stop that, but only if you don't waste the proof trying to save me. There has to be another way." "There isn't. You know there isn't." She reached through the bars and took his hand. "You asked me to trust you. Now I'm asking you to trust me. Take those documents to the marshal. Make him listen. Make him investigate. And don't come back until you have enough power behind you to tear Crow's operation apart. That'll take days, maybe weeks. I know. He'll file charges. You'll be transferred to the territorial prison. I know that too." Silas looked at her, this woman who'd been enslaved, abused, and betrayed by nearly every man she'd ever met, and she was still willing to sacrifice herself for people she barely knew. "I can't lose you," he said quietly. "You won't. I'm harder to kill than I look." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Go, before Crow realizes you're stalling." The deputy returned before Silas could respond. "Time's up." Silas stepped back from the bars, feeling like he was tearing something vital out of his own chest. Vivian held his gaze, steady and certain, and he understood that she'd already made peace with whatever came next. He walked out of the jail, past Crow, who was waiting with that insufferable smile, and climbed onto Constance. "I'll give you 3 days," Crow called after him. "Then I file charges and she's gone for good." Silas didn't answer. He just rode, faster than was wise on the rocky trail, pushing the horse hard because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant losing his nerve. He reached the cabin, gathered the rest of the documents, and packed supplies for a long ride. The territorial marshal's office was in Helena, 2 days northeast if he didn't stop, except to rest the horse. Before he left, he did one thing he'd been avoiding. He rode to Howell's property and found the old man working his newly restored pasture. "I need you to spread the word," Silas said. "Vivian's been arrested. Crow's moving to take control of all the disputed properties. I'm going to Helena to get the marshal, but it'll take at least 4 days round trip." "What do you need?" Howell asked. "I need people to hold their ground. Don't sign anything Crow puts in front of you. Don't abandon your land. Don't give him what he wants." Silas looked at the man who'd been the first to ask for Vivian's help. "She sacrificed herself to get proof of what he's doing. Don't let that sacrifice be for nothing." Howell's face was grim, but he nodded. "I'll spread the word. We'll hold." Silas rode north as the sun climbed higher. The documents were in his saddlebag, creased and stained but complete. The evidence that could break Crow's operation if he could just get someone to listen. Behind him, Vivian sat in a cell, waiting for justice that might never come. And somewhere ahead, in a town he'd never seen, a territorial marshal either would believe the impossible story Silas was bringing or would dismiss him as another desperate farmer with an axe to grind. Everything depended on the next 4 days. Silas pushed Constance harder, the mountain falling away behind him as he descended into the valley that would lead him north to Helena and whatever fate was waiting there. Helena sprawled across the valley like someone had spilled a town and never bothered to clean it up properly. Silas rode in just after dawn on the second day, his body aching from sleeping on cold ground and his mind replaying every moment he'd left Vivian behind in that cell. The territorial marshal's office sat on a side street near the courthouse, a squat brick building that looked more permanent than anything in Ember Flats. Silas tied Constance to the rail outside and pulled the saddlebag containing the documents over his shoulder. His reflection in the window showed a man who looked half wild, unshaven, trail-worn, desperate. Not exactly the image that inspired confidence. He pushed through the door anyway. The marshal was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough of humanity's worst to be permanently suspicious. His nameplate read Marshal Edwin Thorne. He looked up from paperwork as Silas entered, his expression already shifting toward dismissal. "Help you?" Thorne asked. "I need to report a crime. Multiple crimes. Land fraud, forgery, false imprisonment." The words tumbled out faster than Silas intended. A man named Barrett Crow is systematically stealing properties in the Ember Flats region through forged tax documents and manufactured debts. Thorne set down his pen. "That's a serious allegation. I have proof." Silas dropped the saddlebag on the desk. Copies of the real tax records compared to the forgeries Crow's been using. 15 properties so far. Maybe more. Thorne opened the bag and pulled out the documents. He examined them silently, his expression giving nothing away. Minutes stretched. Silas stood there, his heart pounding, while the marshal flipped through page after page. Finally, Thorne looked up. "Where'd you get these?" "The land office in Ember Flats. The originals are locked in the records room. These are copies." "Did you have authorization to make copies?" Silas hesitated. The truth would probably end this conversation immediately, but lying wouldn't help. "No." "So you broke in?" "Yes." Thorne leaned back in his chair. "Let me make sure I understand. You illegally entered a government building, stole confidential documents, made unauthorized copies, and now you want me to use those copies as evidence against a prominent rancher. The copies prove he's a fraud. They prove you committed a crime. That's all they definitely prove." Thorne pushed the documents back across the desk. "Even if these are legitimate, any lawyer worth his fee will get them thrown out as inadmissible. Fruit of the poisoned tree. You understand what that means? It means the law protects criminals if you follow the wrong procedure catching them. It means the law protects everyone's rights, even criminals, because that's how the system works." Thorne's voice was firm but not unkind. "You might be telling the truth. These documents might be real, but I can't build a case on evidence obtained illegally." Silas felt everything collapsing. "So you're not going to investigate?" "I didn't say that. I'm saying I can't use what you brought me." Thorne stood and walked to a map on the wall showing the Montana Territory. "Barrett Crow, I've heard the name, owns the Crow Ranch, big cattle operation, connected to the territorial legislature, has friends in the land office and probably the governor's office too. So he's untouchable," So he's difficult. There's a difference. Thorne turned back to Silas. You want me to investigate? I'll investigate. But I need legitimate cause. That means complaints filed by the actual victims. That means access to the original records through proper channels. That means building a case that'll stand up in court instead of falling apart the moment Crow's lawyers get involved. That'll take weeks, maybe months. Probably. My wife's in jail right now because she helped me get those documents. Crow's threatening to transfer her to the territorial prison and bury her under charges that'll keep her locked up for years. Thorne's expression softened slightly. Your wife, the one who broke in with you. She stayed behind so I could get away with the proof. She sacrificed herself for this. Silas pointed at the documents. And you're telling me it was all for nothing. I'm telling you she sacrificed herself for evidence I can't use in the way you want. That doesn't make it worthless. It tells me what to look for when I do this properly. Thorne sat down again. Here's what I can do. I can ride to Ember Flats, interview the complainants, request access to the land office records through official channels, and begin a preliminary investigation. If I find what you're claiming, I'll build a case. But I can't promise speed, and I can't guarantee your wife won't face charges for the break-in. Oh, she'll be in prison before you even start investigating. Maybe. Or maybe I can delay her transfer while I look into whether the charges against her are part of this larger pattern of misconduct. Thorne met Silas's eyes. That's the best I can offer. Take it or leave it. Silas wanted to argue, to demand faster action, to make this man understand that every day wasted was a day Vivian suffered. But he could see in Thorne's face that pushing harder would only make things worse. How long before you can start? Silas asked. I'll leave tomorrow. Get to Ember Flats in 2 days, start interviews immediately. Thorne pulled out a form. I'll need a formal statement from you. Names, dates, everything you know about Crow's operation. Silas spent the next 3 hours telling Thorne everything. The forged documents. The systematic targeting of vulnerable homesteaders. Crow's attempt to hire Vivian and his threats when she refused. The intimidation. The corruption of local officials. Thorne took notes, asked pointed questions, and occasionally looked skeptical but never dismissive. When they finished, Silas felt hollowed out and exhausted. One more thing, Thorne said. This woman, your wife, what's her name? Vivian Mercer. Used to be Hale. And you said she was purchased by someone named Garrick Stern before you bought her. Silas stiffened. I didn't buy her. I won her in a card game to get her away from Stern. Distinction without a difference in the law's eyes, but I'm not here to debate semantics. Thorne made another note. Stern filed the original claim on her, right, at Crow's encouragement? Yes. So Crow's been planning this for a while, using Stern's claim as leverage to force your wife to work for him. Thorne nodded slowly. That's useful. Shows premeditation. Shows a pattern of using legal mechanisms for illegal purposes. Does it help her? It might. If I can prove Crow manipulated the system to file false charges, I can petition to have her released pending investigation. Thorne looked at Silas. But you need to understand something. Even in the best scenario, this is going to take time. Your wife might be in custody for weeks, maybe longer. You need to be prepared for that. Silas felt something break inside him. He'd ridden 2 days, poured out everything he knew, and the best outcome was still Vivian locked up, while bureaucracy slowly turned. She told me to trust her, Silas said quietly. That's what she said. Trust her to survive whatever comes. Then trust her. Thorne stood and extended his hand. And trust me to do my job. It won't be fast, but it'll be thorough. Silas shook his hand and left the office feeling like he'd accomplished something and nothing at the same time. He had help now. Real help. But real help moved at the speed of law, and law moved like molasses in winter. He slept in a boarding house that night, the first real bed he'd had in days, but sleep wouldn't come. He kept seeing Vivian's face through the bars of that cell, kept hearing her voice telling him to go, to trust her, to not waste the proof. The next morning he started the ride back to Ember Flats. Thorne would leave a day behind him, which meant Silas would get there first. He didn't know what he'd find when he arrived, but sitting in Helena waiting wasn't an option. He pushed Constance hard again, making the return trip in a day and a half by riding through the night. When he finally crested the last ridge above Ember Flats, the sun was setting and the town looked quiet. Too quiet. He rode straight to the jail. The deputy was outside, smoking a cigarette and looking nervous. Where is she? Silas demanded. The deputy dropped his cigarette. Mercer, you shouldn't be here. Where's Vivian? Transferred, yesterday. Crow filed the charges and the territorial judge ordered her moved to the prison in Deer Lodge. Silas felt the ground drop out from under him. Deer Lodge was 100 miles north, a fortress prison where territorial felons were held. If Vivian was there, getting her out would be nearly impossible. You let them take her, Silas said, his voice dangerous. I didn't have a choice. The order came from the judge. I'm just a deputy. Silas wanted to hit something, wanted to scream, wanted to burn the whole town down. Instead, he turned Constance around and rode toward Crow's ranch. He knew it was stupid, knew it would probably get him killed or arrested or both, but rage and desperation had pushed out everything resembling sense, and he needed to face the man who'd destroyed everything. The Crow Ranch sprawled across the valley floor, bigger than Silas had imagined. Cattle dotted the landscape. Buildings clustered around a main house that looked more like a mansion. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and Silas was stopped by 2 armed men before he got within 100 yards of the house. I'm here to see Crow, Silas said. He's not seeing anyone. He'll see me. Tell him Silas Mercer wants to talk about his wife. One of the guards went inside while the other kept a rifle pointed casually in Silas's direction. After 10 minutes, the guard returned and nodded. He'll see you, but you leave your weapons here. Silas handed over his knife and pistol. They led him inside to an office that was all dark wood and expensive furniture. Crow sat behind a massive desk, looking relaxed and pleased with himself. Mercer, I'm surprised you came back. Thought you'd be hiding on your mountain. You sent Vivian to Deer Lodge. I filed charges. The judge agreed they were warranted. Your wife broke the law. Now she's paying the price. The charges are fraudulent, same as your tax documents. Crow smiled. Prove it. I will. The territorial marshal's investigating. He's on his way here now. Marshal Thorne. Yes, I heard he might be sniffing around. I'm not concerned. Crow leaned back. See, the thing about investigations is they take time. And during that time, life goes on. Properties get foreclosed, people move away, evidence disappears. By the time Thorne finishes his very thorough, very careful investigation, there won't be anything left to find. The original records are still in the land office. Are they? Funny thing about records? They're remarkably fragile. Fires happen, floods, simple bureaucratic errors. Documents get lost all the time. Silas felt cold understanding settle over him. You're going to destroy them. I'm not going to do anything, but accidents happen. Crow stood and walked to the window overlooking his land. You cost me something, Mercer. I wanted your wife's expertise. I was willing to pay well for it. Instead, you turned her against me, stole from me, and created a situation that's forcing me to clean up loose ends I'd rather not deal with. So this is revenge. This is business. You made yourself my enemy. Now you're learning what that means. Crow turned back. Your wife will spend the next 10 years in Deer Lodge if she's lucky. You'll lose your property within the month, and everyone you convince to hold their ground against me will be gone by spring. That's not revenge. That's just the natural consequence of fighting someone who plays the game better than you. Silas took a step forward. The guards moved immediately, weapons raised. Silas stopped. You haven't won yet, Silas said. Yes, I have. You just don't know it yet. Crow gestured to the guards. Get him out of here, and if he comes back, arrest him for trespassing. They threw Silas out of the ranch house and escorted him to the property line. He rode away with his weapons returned and his rage burning hotter than before. Back in town, he went to the saloon and found Howell, Margaret, and several other farmers gathered in a corner, talking in low voices. They looked up when Silas approached. Did you see the marshal? Howell asked. He's coming. But Crow moved faster. He transferred Vivian to Deer Lodge, and he's planning to destroy the original records before Thorne can get to them. Margaret's face fell. So we've lost. No. Silas sat down, his mind racing. We haven't lost. But we need to move now, tonight. Move how? Howell asked. The land office. We need to get the original records before Crow destroys them. We document everything. Photograph it if we can, make copies that can't be dismissed as stolen. Then we hold those records until Thorne gets here. That's breaking in again, Margaret said. After what happened to Vivian, After what happened to Vivian, we owe it to her not to let this be for nothing. Silas looked at each of them. Crow thinks he's won because he's got power and connections and enough money to corrupt anyone who matters, but he's missing something. He doesn't have what we have. What's that? Howell asked. Each other. 15 families who've been helping each other survive for months. People who know the difference between legal and right. Silas leaned forward. Crow's alone. He's got hired men and corrupt officials, but he doesn't have loyalty. We do. And if we stand together, we can outlast him. The room was quiet. Then Howell nodded. What do you need? Everyone with a property claim Crow's targeting. We all go to the land office together. We make a public demand to see the records. We document everything in front of witnesses. And if Petrie tries to stop us, we don't back down. They'll arrest all of us, someone said. Maybe, but they can't arrest the whole territory. And if Thorne shows up to find half the community in jail for demanding to see public records that prove fraud, that's going to be hard for Crow to explain away. Margaret looked uncertain. This is a big risk. Everything's a risk. Staying, going, fighting, running. The question is which risk we can live with. Silas met her eyes. Vivian's in Deer Lodge because she believed these people mattered enough to sacrifice for. I'm asking you to believe it too. Slowly, one by one, they agreed. They gathered the next morning in front of the land office. 23 people. Every family Vivian had helped over the past months. They stood in a group facing the door while curious townspeople gathered to watch. Petrie saw them through the window and tried to lock the door, but Howell got there first and pushed it open. We're here to see our tax records, Howell announced loudly. Public records, which we have a legal right to examine. Petrie's face went red. You can't all just storm in here. We're not storming, we're requesting. Margaret stepped forward. Unless you're saying we don't have a right to see documents about our own properties? A crowd was forming outside now. People loved a spectacle, and this was shaping up to be one. Petrie looked panicked. I need to get authorization. From who? Silas asked. These are public records in a public office. You're a public servant. Serve the public. The deputy arrived, summoned by someone in the crowd. He looked at the situation and seemed to realize he was in over his head. What's going on here? The deputy asked. We're exercising our legal right to examine public records, Howell said calmly. No crime, no violence, just citizens asking to see documents about our own land. The deputy looked at Petrie. That legal? Well, yes, technically, but then let them see the records. The deputy crossed his arms. I'm not arresting 20 people for looking at paperwork. Petrie looked like he wanted to argue, but the crowd outside was growing and the situation was slipping out of his control. Finally, he unlocked the records room door. Fine. But you touch anything, you're out. They filed in systematically. Silas directed people to find their own property files. One by one, they pulled the original records and compared them to the forged documents they'd received from Crow. Mine says paid in full, Howell called out. The forgery says I owe $300. Same here, Margaret said. My taxes are current. The document Crow gave me is completely fabricated. Person after person confirmed the same pattern. Real records showing everything current. Forged documents showing debts that didn't exist. Someone had brought a camera. They photographed each discrepancy. Original next to forgery. Clear evidence of systematic fraud. Petrie watched, his face growing paler. He knew what this meant. When Thorne arrived, there would be irrefutable proof. Proof that couldn't be dismissed as stolen because it had been obtained through legitimate public request, witnessed by half the town. They were documenting the last set of files when Crow arrived with 6 armed men. He pushed through the crowd outside and stopped in the doorway of the land office, taking in the scene. His expression was cold fury, barely controlled. What is this? He demanded. Public records review, Silas said. Legal. Witnessed. Documented. These people are disrupting official business. We're conducting official business, Howell interrupted, unless you're saying we don't have a right to see our own files. Crow's jaw worked. He looked at the deputy. Arrest them. All of them. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. For what? They're just looking at papers. For trespassing, conspiracy, theft. They didn't take anything. And it's a public office. The deputy was young, but he wasn't stupid. I arrest 20 people for looking at public records. I'll be the one who looks bad, not them." Crow turned his cold gaze on Silas. "You think you're clever, but this proves nothing." "It proves everything." Silas held up a stack of photographs. "Original records showing no debt. Your forged documents showing manufactured debt. Pattern across 15 properties. All photographed. All witnessed. All documented properly this time. Photographs can be faked. Not when they're taken in front of 40 witnesses with the deputy present." Silas smiled for the first time in days. "You've been cornered. You just don't know it yet." Crow's hand moved toward his coat. Silas saw the motion and understood what was about to happen. Crow was going to draw a weapon, was going to claim self-defense or provocation or anything that would justify violence. Silas stepped forward, hands visible and empty. "Go ahead, shoot me in front of all these witnesses. See how that helps your case." Crow's hand froze. His eyes darted to the crowd, to the deputy, to his own men who looked uncertain. The situation had spun completely out of his control. "This isn't over," Crow said. "Yes, it is." The voice came from the doorway. Marshal Thorne pushed through the crowd, his badge visible and his expression grim. "Mr. Crow, I'm going to need you to come with me. I have questions about these property transfers." Crow's face went white. "I don't have to answer anything without my lawyer. You're welcome to have your lawyer present, but you're still coming with me." Thorne looked at the deputy. "Secure this office, no one in or out until I've finished interviewing everyone and examining the records myself." "You don't have jurisdiction here," Crow said. "I have territorial jurisdiction anywhere I determine a crime's been committed, and based on what I'm seeing, there's been quite a lot of crime." Thorne gestured to his deputies. He'd brought 3 with him from Helena. "Escort Mr. Crow to the courthouse, politely, unless he resists." Crow looked like he wanted to resist, wanted to fight, but he was smart enough to recognize when he'd lost the immediate battle. He let them lead him away, his men following uncertainly. Thorne turned to Silas. "You couldn't wait 2 more days? He was going to destroy the records. We had to move. And you did, loudly, publicly, with enough witnesses that no lawyer in the territory can claim this evidence is tainted." Thorne almost smiled. "Not how I would have done it, but effective." Over the next 3 days, Thorne conducted interviews and examined records. He found everything Silas had claimed and more. Not just the 15 properties they knew about, but 23. Crow had been systematically targeting anyone vulnerable, manufacturing debt, and seizing land through a web of forged documents and corrupted officials. Petrie confessed almost immediately, naming Crow as the source of the forgeries and admitting he'd been paid to file false records. The tax assessor, Grimsby, was arrested trying to flee the territory. Even the judge who'd ordered Vivian transferred turned out to be on Crow's payroll. The evidence was overwhelming, comprehensive, damning. But Vivian was still in Deer Lodge. Silas went to Thorne on the 4th day. "You have everything you need to charge Crow. Get Vivian released. I'm working on it. But the wheels of justice, I don't care about wheels. She's innocent. She's been in that prison for a week for a crime she committed trying to expose a criminal. Get her out." Thorne looked at him steadily. "I filed the petition yesterday, but the territorial court has to review it, and they're backed up with cases. Could be another week." "That's not good enough." "It's the system. We have." Silas felt fury rising. The system put her there for doing the right thing. The system let Crow steal from people for months. At what point does the system actually protect anyone? When enough people demand it does. Thorne's voice was firm. "You did that. Those families did that. Now the system's responding, just not as fast as you want." Silas left before he said something that would land him in the cell next to Crow. He rode back to the cabin and spent the next week working the land Vivian had restored, trying to channel his helplessness into something productive. The word came on the 8th day. A writer from Helena with a telegram. Vivian's charges had been dismissed. She was being released immediately and provided transportation back to Ember Flats. Silas rode to town and waited at the stage depot like a man watching for salvation. When the stage finally arrived 2 days later and Vivian stepped out, thin and pale but whole, something inside him that had been clenched tight finally released. She saw him and stopped. For a moment they just looked at each other. Then she walked over, moving stiffly, and he caught her before her legs gave out. "You did it," she said quietly. "Thorne told me. You got the evidence. You broke his operation. We did it. All of us. Silas held her carefully, aware of how fragile she felt. Are you all right? I've been worse. She pulled back to look at him. Is it really over? Crow's in custody. The properties are being returned. Petrie and Grimsby are facing charges. The corrupt judge resigned. Silas managed to smile. It's really over. Vivian's eyes filled with tears, and she let them fall without trying to hide them. I didn't think we'd win. I thought we'd fight and lose, and at least we'd have tried. But we actually won. You won. You saw what Crow was doing. You got the proof. You sacrificed yourself so the truth could get out. We sacrificed, she corrected, together. They rode back to the cabin slowly. Vivian was exhausted, and Silas could see the toll the last weeks had taken. But she was free. She was home. And that was enough for now. The final hearing took place 3 weeks later. Crow faced the territorial judge, a new one, brought in from another district, and the evidence was presented methodically. Documents, photographs, testimony from 23 families, confessions from Petrie and Grimsby. Crow's lawyers tried everything, claimed the evidence was tainted, argued technicalities, attacked the credibility of witnesses, but there was too much proof and too many people willing to testify. The case was airtight. The judge ruled that all properties seized through fraudulent documents would be returned to their original owners. Crow was fined, stripped of his territorial land holdings, and faced criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and corruption of public officials. His ranch would be sold to pay restitution. Stern, who'd filed the original claim on Vivian, was found and arrested for human trafficking and conspiracy. He confessed that Crow had paid him to create the claim and testify at the hearing. He got 5 years. When it was all done, when the legal machinery had finally ground through every motion and appeal, Silas and Vivian stood outside the courthouse watching Crow being led away in chains. How do you feel? Silas asked. Like I can breathe for the first time in years. Vivian watched until Crow disappeared from view. He thought power made him untouchable. He forgot that power only works when people accept it. When they refuse, when they stand together, it falls apart. They walked back through town, and people nodded as they passed. Some stopped to thank them. Others just watched with respect that hadn't been there months before. At the edge of town, Margaret caught up with them. I wanted you to know. We're organizing. All the families you helped. We're going to form a cooperative, pool resources, share knowledge, make sure nobody can do what Crow did ever again. That's good, Vivian said. We want you to lead it. You've got the knowledge, the vision. People trust you. Vivian looked at Silas, then back at Margaret. I appreciate that, but I'm done leading. I'll help. I'll share what I know. But someone else needs to step up. You, maybe. Or Howell. The point of all this wasn't to replace Crow with someone else telling people what to do. It was to give people the power to make their own choices. Margaret smiled. Then we'll make it a council. Everyone has a voice. No single person in charge. That's better. As they walked away, Silas said, You could have taken that position. They'd have followed you. I know. That's why I can't take it. I spent too long being controlled by men who thought they knew better. I'm not becoming that person for others. She looked at him. Besides, I have other things to focus on. Like what? She took his hand and he felt something different in the gesture. Not desperation or necessity, something softer. Like building a real marriage. If you're still interested. Silas stopped walking. Are you saying? I'm saying the last 5 months we've been partners out of necessity. We got married to protect me legally. We fought together because we had to, but now we don't have to do anything. She faced him fully. So I'm asking, do you want to stay married because the paper says we are, or because you actually want to be? Silas looked at this woman who'd walked into his life as property and transformed it into something he barely recognized, who'd taken his dying land and made it thrive, who'd helped dozens of people without asking for anything in return, who'd sacrificed herself rather than let corruption win. I want to be, he said, not because of what you did or what you know, just because of who you are. Vivian smiled, real and unguarded. Then let's start over, properly this time, as equals choosing each other. Winter came to the mountain, and this year Silas wasn't facing it alone. He and Vivian worked the land together, preparing it for spring planting, They talked about what to grow, about expanding, about the future in ways Silas had stopped letting himself imagine years ago. The cooperative Margaret had mentioned became real. 15 families working together, sharing knowledge and resources. Vivian taught them her techniques, and they taught her things she'd never learned. It became an exchange, a community built on mutual respect instead of exploitation. In February, during a cold snap that froze everything solid, Vivian told Silas she was pregnant. He'd been splitting wood when she said it, and he nearly took his own foot off with the axe. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor, which I'll see when the past clears." Silas set down the axe and just looked at her. She was wearing his old coat over her dress, her breath misting in the cold air, her cheeks red from wind. She looked nervous, hopeful, uncertain. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Terrified? Excited?" "Both." She moved closer. "I never thought I'd have this. A family. A home. A life that was actually mine to live. And now I do, and it's overwhelming. We'll figure it out. That's your answer to everything. It's worked so far." She laughed, and the sound carried across the snow-covered field. "Yes, it has." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it came with force. The cover crops Vivian had planted turned the field brilliant green. The irrigation system she'd designed brought water to every section. The soil, enriched and restored, produced growth like Silas had never seen. The first real harvest came in July. Wheat thick and golden, heads heavy with grain. More than enough to sustain them through winter with plenty left to sell. Silas stood in the field, looking at what had been barren rock just 2 years before, and felt something close to contentment. Vivian came out to join him, moving slower now with the pregnancy showing. She surveyed the field with the same critical eye she always had, then nodded. "It'll do," she said. "It'll do? This is the best crop this mountain's ever seen. The next year we'll make it better." They were standing there when riders appeared on the trail. Silas tensed automatically, but he recognized Howell's gray mule. The old man rode up with Margaret and several others from the cooperative. "We've been talking," Howell said without preamble, "about recognition, about making sure people know what happened here wasn't just luck or accident." "What do you mean?" Vivian asked. Margaret dismounted and pulled out a rolled document. "We've drafted a petition to the territorial government requesting that you be recognized as an agricultural advisor, an official position, with resources to help other communities facing the same problems we faced." Vivian looked at the document, then at them. "I can't take an official position. I don't have formal education or credentials." "You have results," Howell said. "You've helped more people grow successful crops than any university expert. That's credential enough." "And if we don't push for this, someone else will take credit," Margaret added. "Some man with a degree who'll claim he developed these techniques. We want to make sure your name is attached to what you actually did." Vivian looked at Silas. He could see the conflict in her face, the fear of being put on display again, the desire to help, the exhaustion of always having to fight for recognition. "It's your choice," Silas said quietly. "But whatever you decide, I'm with you." She looked at the petition again, then at the field they'd restored together. "I'll do it. But only if it's clear this wasn't just me. It was all of us. Everyone who took a risk to stand against Crow. Everyone who chose community over self-preservation. That's the story that needs to be told." "We can do that," Margaret said. The petition was filed, and 3 months later, Vivian received official recognition from the territorial government as an agricultural consultant. Newspapers ran stories about the woman who'd helped restore dying land across the region. Requests came in from other communities facing similar struggles. Vivian took some of them. Not all. She was selective, focusing on places where her knowledge could make the biggest difference. And she always made sure to credit the communities she worked with, turning every success into a shared victory. In October, as leaves turned gold and the air grew sharp with the promise of winter, Vivian went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments Silas thought he might lose both her and the child. But when it was over and the midwife placed a screaming, red-faced girl in Vivian's arms, everything else fell away. "She's perfect," Vivian whispered, exhausted and smiling. "She's loud," Silas said, but he was smiling too. They named her Sarah, after Vivian's mother. Sarah Mercer, born free in a home built by people who'd fought for the right to build anything at all. The years that followed weren't easy. Farming never was. There were dry seasons and wet seasons, years when crops failed despite everything they knew, times when money was tight and the future uncertain. But they faced it together, and that made the difference. The cooperative grew. More families joined. The techniques Vivian had pioneered spread across the territory and beyond. Other communities formed their own cooperatives, building networks of mutual support that made the kind of exploitation Crow had attempted much harder to sustain. Crow himself served 8 years of a 15-year sentence before dying of pneumonia in the territorial prison. By then, his empire had been completely dismantled, his land redistributed, his name a cautionary tale about the limits of power built on corruption. Stern died in prison too, though nobody made much note of it. Some people leave the world, and the world barely notices. As Sarah grew, Vivienne told her stories about what had happened, not sanitized versions, but the truth, about being treated as property, about men who thought they could own other people, about the fight to reclaim her own life and the community that had made it possible. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked when she was 8, old enough to understand but young enough to still believe the world was mostly good. "Because you need to know what freedom costs," Vivian said. "It's not something you're given. It's something you fight for. And once you have it, you protect it. Not just for yourself, but for everyone." "Did you protect it?" "I tried. We tried. Your father and me and a lot of good people who decided they'd rather risk everything than accept a world where people like Crow made all the rules." "Did it work?" Vivienne looked out at the field where wheat grew thick and strong, at the cabin that had expanded over the years into something approaching a real house, at the community that had formed in the valley below. "What do you think?" she asked. Sarah considered this seriously, the way children do when they're trying to understand big concepts. "I think it worked. Because we're here and we're free." "That's right. We're here, we're free. And that's worth protecting." On a spring morning 10 years after that first desperate night, when Silas had put $18 on a table to buy a woman nobody wanted, he stood in the same field Vivian had first examined with her critical eye. She was beside him, older now with gray starting to show in her dark hair, teaching Sarah how to read soil composition. "See how it crumbles?" Vivian was saying. "That means it's got good structure. Not too wet, not too dry. The organic matter you can see here, that's what feeds the plants." Sarah, now 15 and already showing signs of having inherited her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubbornness, nodded seriously. "And if it was too wet?" "It would stick together. Clump. You'd need to add sand or compost to open it up." Silas watched them, these two people who'd become his entire world, and felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever after his brother died. Purpose. Not just survival, but meaning. A reason to wake up that went beyond simply making it through another day. Vivian looked up and caught him watching. "What are you thinking about?" "About how I almost walked away that night, in the saloon, how I almost just finished my drink and left because getting involved seemed like more trouble than it was worth." "What changed your mind?" "I don't know. Maybe I was tired of watching terrible things happen and doing nothing. Maybe I was tired of being half dead inside. Or maybe I just got lucky and made one decent choice in a lifetime of avoiding them." Vivian stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "It wasn't luck. It was courage. Even if you didn't feel courageous at the time." "I didn't. I felt like an idiot gambling away money I needed for seed. Well, look what that seed money bought." She gestured at the field, at Sarah, at everything they'd built. "Not a bad return on investment." Sarah looked between them. "Is this one of those moments where you're going to get all sentimental and embarrassing?" "Probably," Silas said. "Then I'm going to go check the irrigation channels." She walked off, trying to look annoyed but smiling despite herself. Vivian moved closer to Silas, and he put his arm around her. They stood there looking at the land they'd brought back from death, at the community they'd helped build, at the future they'd made possible through nothing more complicated than choosing to fight when fighting seemed impossible. "Do you ever regret it?" Vivian asked quietly. "Everything that happened, the fight, the risk?" "Every single day," Silas said honestly. "I regret that you had to suffer, that you spent time in that prison, that we had to fight it all instead of just being left alone to live our lives. But I don't regret the outcome. I don't regret that we won, and I don't regret choosing you over the easier path of walking away." He looked at her. You changed everything. Not just the land, me, the whole territory eventually. You showed people that broken things can be fixed if you're willing to do the work. We did that, she corrected. Together. Together, he agreed. They stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming the field and promising another season of growth. In the distance, Sarah was examining an irrigation channel, already thinking about improvements. In the valley below, smoke rose from chimneys where families woke to another day of work and hope and building something that would outlast them. And on the mountain where a man had once lived alone with his failure and his grief, life had come back. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and worth every sacrifice it had taken to achieve. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed and the cabin was quiet, Vivian sat at the table writing in the journal she'd started keeping. She wrote about the day's work, about Sarah's progress, about plans for next season's planting. Then on the last page, she wrote something different. I spent 2 years believing I was nothing more than what men said I was. Property, labor, something to be used and discarded. Then I met a man who looked at me and saw a person, who gave me space to be more than I'd been allowed to be, who fought beside me instead of for me. That changed everything. Not because he saved me, I had to save myself, but because he showed me that partnership was possible, that freedom wasn't just escape, but the ability to choose how you lived and who you built your life with. We've built something good here, something that will outlast us. And every time I see that field growing strong, or watch our daughter read the soil the way I taught her, or feel Silas's hand in mine, I remember that the choice to fight, even when fighting seemed impossible, was the right one. Not because we won, because we tried, because we refused to accept that power and corruption always win. They don't. Not if enough people stand up and say no. Not if enough people choose community over fear. Not if enough people remember that we're all more than what the world tries to make us. We're what we choose to become. Together. She closed the journal and looked out the window at the field silvered by moonlight. Somewhere in that field, seeds they'd planted were already pushing toward the surface, preparing for another season of growth. Somewhere in the valley, families slept secure in homes they'd fought to keep. Somewhere in the territory, people were reading about what had happened here and thinking maybe, just maybe, they could fight their own battles and win. The story that had started with $18 and a desperate gamble had become something bigger than either of them could have imagined. It had become proof that broken systems could be challenged, that corrupt power could be defeated, that people who'd been told they were nothing could become everything. And on a small mountain farm in Montana, where the land had learned to live again, two people who'd found each other in darkness had built something that would endure long after they were gone. Not because it was perfect, because it was true.
Hi, my name is William Sunny, the owner and manager of Iron Cowboy Gardena. After watching the video, Mountain Man won a worthless wife at a poker table. What she was hiding changed everything. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What really stayed with me was how the story slowly turned from survival into trust. Silas didn't step in because he had all the answers. He just knew he couldn't ignore something cruel happening right in front of him. And Vivian carried so much strength and knowledge even after everything she'd been through. I think that's what made this story hit so deeply for me. Do you think people can truly change each other's lives just by choosing kindness at the right moment? And which part of the story felt the most meaningful to you? Sometimes we forget that giving someone respect or a second chance can completely change the direction of a life. If this story meant something to you, feel free to leave a comment, like, or subscribe. I always enjoy reading your thoughts and hearing where everyone's watching from.